Welcome back to Face the State on this Sunday morning, and here to talk about the governor's race, author and columnist Susan Campbell and Russell Blair of the Hartford Courant, formerly of the Daily Campus, the Yukon Daily newspaper. And folks, thanks for being with us. You're also a teacher as well, Susan.
Yes, I am.
So I want to get your take, Russell, because I know that you've been covering the governor's race probably all the time. 20-odd candidates. Who do you think is going to be falling out, and how does it work?
Well, I mean, the convention is where we hope the herd gets thinned, but there's also a couple of people that could try to gather signatures to petition their way onto the ballot. You know, I've heard from Republicans and Democrats there could be between 3 and 5 people in a primary on both sides. So if you're a political junkie, it's going to be a wild summer. So strap yourself in.
So the 3 candidates may not be realistic, is what Tim Herbst was saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it could be more than that. You know, there's a couple of self-funders on the Republican side. David Stemmerman, who was on the show last week, you know, he's somebody who could go out, hire people to collect signatures. He could petition his way onto the primary ballot. There's another self-funder, Bob Stefanowski. He could do something similar. So I think, you know, even if there are people that don't get that 15% at the convention that we heard Tim Herbst talk about, they could still find a way to get onto the primary ballot. So it could be a very, very spread out race.
I'm going to ask you about the female candidates in just a moment, but Susan, you did a great article recently about all the women in the country who are now running for office, more so than in recent years, but we're not seeing that many in Connecticut, at least not for the top office. What are you finding?
I'm finding anecdotally that where you're seeing them, they're starting to bubble up from town committees, and not just Democratic town committees, but Republican town committees as well. And there are some women who've expressed interest. I spoke with Claire Kendall, who's a Democratic candidate for AG, Attorney General. And it's like she said, this is no time for training wheels. So you do see a lot of women getting involved. Maybe they're on the school board, maybe they're on the town committee, but they're involved.
And to touch upon what you said, so it's Republicans as well as Democrats.
It really is, although the Republican Party doesn't tend to have this sort of movement. And I don't think it's just a reaction on the Democratic side to Donald Trump's election. But for Republicans, and this is in general, and they don't all think the same, there's a shying away from what they call gender politics. So this would be considered two gender politics, two identity politics, this one group that feels like it's being left out, now asking for a seat at the table. That's more of a Democratic thing.
And Russell, in terms of the governor's race, in terms of, I mean, it's an overwhelmingly male field on both sides, the Democrats and the Republicans. The Democrats have a declared candidate, J.C. Wyatt. She doesn't have much of a campaign operation, but she is invited to all the debates and so forth. Dita Bargava just dropped out, decided to run for treasurer. So Susan Bysiewicz is the big name waiting for. On the Republican side, the 2 women are both explorers.
Yeah, Erin Stewart and State Senator Tony Boucher, the 2 women exploring. And, you know, you talk about female candidates and some of the challenges that they face. My colleague Danielle Altamari wrote a pretty revealing story. You know, Erin Stewart got in the race. Certainly she's young, she's 30. But, you know, some of the questions she faced about her experience, her demeanor, you know, you wonder, would a male candidate that was 30 face those same questions? And I think that's something that, you know, she explored in that story, and I think, you know, something worth exploring. And 2, you know, top Democratic, you know, potential candidates, or 2 top potential candidates, Democrat and Republican, passed on the race. Themis Klarides, the House Minority Leader, and Lieutenant Governor Nancy Wyman. You know, both of them didn't enter the race, and, you know, you wonder, you know, does that, what they would face in a campaign, play a role in that decision?
Are women voters out there saying, you know, because of, you know, they're still disappointed perhaps that Hillary Clinton lost in 2016, you know, are they more committed to electing a woman this year, perhaps as governor?
It looks that way, but again, it's anecdotally. The Center for American Women in Politics out of Rutgers University is charting the involvement of women. And the Women's Campaign School at Yale is seeing just an overwhelming reaction to any of the events they're holding. For their last summer session in 2017, they had 80 slots. They had 500 applicants. And they're seeing a similar kind of outpouring now. So it's not that women are ducking and covering. They're very much getting into the race.
One of our guests last week, Todd Feinberg, and I'm quoting him here, he said, the chick factor is important. And I know many of our viewers wrote to me, they were offended by that language. We apologize for having that on. I know it was upsetting to many of our viewers. Language is going to be important this year.
Very much. It is. And something like the chick factor is going to be a phrase that people will remember. There are a huge contingent of women who don't particularly want to be called chicks, just as there is a huge contingent of men who wouldn't want to be called the equivalent.
Exactly. All right, let's talk a little bit about, there were no front runners to speak of, right, on either side. I mean, there are some people with more money than others.
Yeah, we look at campaign finance reports as a way to sort of gauge, who's ahead. But even on the Republican side, there's a half dozen people that have met that threshold to qualify for public financing. So even the money makes it hard. On the Democratic side, some familiar names people know: former Secretary of State Susan Beiswitz, Ned Lamont, who won that Democratic primary against Joe Lieberman for Senate, Hartford Mayor Luke Bronin. They're pretty well known. But what's remarkable is if you talk to people that cover this kind of stuff, we're sitting here in March, the convention is in May, and you talk to Republicans and Democrats and independent political analysts, and no one really knows who's the front runner. Usually if you're shaping up for a primary, you have a front runner, and then maybe you have somebody who's kind of the challenge candidate or the alternative option. And here we just have, so many options. One possibility is you could go into a convention and you could end up where nobody actually gets the nomination because nobody gets the percentage that they need to be the so-called endorsed candidate. Nobody breaks that threshold.
So is there anyone who has a buzz right now that people are talking about that you know of? Briefly?
I have no idea. I'm interested as to why there's not a front runner, and I don't have the answer. And if Russell does, rock on. But
I think there are so many. Number one,
I think certainly there are so many.
It's hard to have a debate.
It's hard to have a debate. I've covered some Republican debates where you have 9 or 10 people on stage. I've covered some Democratic forums where you have 9 or 10 people on stage. Yeah. I think there's a lot of interest because it's an open seat and it's a competitive election in Connecticut. We're bright blue on the federal level, but this is a really good chance for Republicans.
Russell, Blair, Susan Campbell, we thank you so much for being with us today.